The night before the most important recording session of her career, Whitney Houston drove herself to Newark. No driver, no entourage. Just her, a rental car with a broken heat dial, and the kind of silence that only finds you when everyone else is asleep, and you're still awake with something heavy in your chest you don't have a name for yet. It was February 1992. The world already owned her. The debut album, 7 consecutive #1 singles, the Grammy, the tours that sold out before the phone lines even opened. By every measurement the music industry had invented, Whitney Houston had already won. Now The Bodyguard was about to begin filming, and the soundtrack needed a centerpiece, a ballad that could carry an entire movie on its back. Clive Davis had called that morning with the particular voice he reserved for conversations that weren't really conversations. "I will always love you," he had said. "Dolly Parton, we're going to make it yours." Whitney had smiled in the way you smile when you understand that a decision has already been made. She drove through streets she had grown up in, past the school where a music teacher had told her, when she was 9 years old, that she had a voice God had placed there for a reason, and that she had better treat it accordingly. Past everything that had existed before the voice became a product, before it belonged to everyone else. She parked outside New Hope Baptist Church at 11:15 on a Tuesday night. She didn't know exactly why. She had driven there the way you sometimes drive somewhere without consciously deciding to. Your hands finding the route your mind hasn't chosen yet. She got out of the car anyway. The fellowship hall should have been empty. But through the door Whitney could hear something. A voice, old and low and moving through a melody she hadn't heard since childhood. Something from before the radio. Something from before recordings existed to preserve it. She pushed the door open slowly. The woman sitting at the upright piano in the corner was 78 years old. Her name was Clara Mae Washington, and she had been singing in this church since 1948. Not as a featured soloist or choir director. She had simply been here, Sunday after Sunday, decade after decade. A constant presence in the second row of the soprano section, the woman the other sopranos unconsciously tuned toward when they lost their pitch. If you asked anyone in the congregation about Clara Mae, they would tell you she was a faithful woman, a good neighbor. They would not immediately think to tell you about her voice. It had never occurred to anyone to separate it out and hold it up to the light. Clara Mae played with 2 fingers on her right hand and a quiet patience on her left. She was singing something old, something that moved the way rivers move, without hurry, without doubt, without any desire to arrive somewhere faster than it was already going. Whitney stood in the doorway and did not say a word. She had been in rehearsals for 6 days straight. She had sung "I Will Always Love You" 43 times in 2 weeks, working through arrangements with David Foster, adjusting phrasing, finding the technical path through the song's considerable demands. She knew exactly where every note lived. She could hit each one with a precision that made producers look at each other across the glass with expressions of people watching something they didn't fully understand. But there was something she kept reaching for and couldn't find. She had described it to her vocal coach as the why. The reason the song had existed before, it was a song. She could sing every word. She could not yet make them true in the way she needed them to be. Listening to Clara Mae Washington sing in that empty fellowship hall, Whitney understood exactly what she had been missing. It wasn't technique. It wasn't range or control or any of the mechanical achievements she had spent years perfecting. It was the willingness to sound like it cost you something, to let the voice carry not just the melody, but the weight behind it, the specific gravity of having lived long enough to actually mean what you were saying, down to the last syllable. Clara Mae finished her song and opened her eyes and saw the young woman in the doorway. She did not react the way people usually reacted when they saw Whitney Houston. She looked at her with simple, unhurried attention. "You lost, honey," she said. "No, ma'am," Whitney said. "I heard you singing." "I sing to keep myself company," Clara Mae said. "Old habit. You want to sit down?" Whitney sat down on a folding chair across from the piano. She did not explain who she was. What she needed in that moment was not to be Whitney Houston. She just needed to be a young woman sitting in her childhood church, listening to someone who understood something she didn't. "What were you singing?" Whitney asked. "Something my grandmother taught me," Clara Mae said. "She learned it from her mother. These old songs don't really have a beginning you can point to. They just are." Clara May looked at her steadily. "I've heard you on the radio," she said after a moment. "You've got a gift. Anybody can hear that." She paused. "But you're singing like someone trying to prove something." She said it the way an older person can sometimes say a hard thing and have it land soft, because it's clearly coming from love. "You hear the difference?" Whitney was quiet. "What do you mean?" "When I sing," Clara May said, "I'm not trying to hit the note anymore. I gave up on that a long time ago." A small smile crossed her face. "My voice went sideways on me in 1979. I can't do what I used to do technically, but something happened when I stopped trying to prove I could. I stopped showing the note and I started feeling toward it. Those are two entirely different things." She sang a phrase. Just a phrase. 8 or 9 words from an old hymn Whitney half recognized from summers spent in this very building. And the hair on Whitney's arm stood up. It wasn't perfect. The note wavered at the top. Clara May's voice carried the evidence of 78 years. The roughness, the texture of a voice used for decades in service of something larger than performance. And it was the most honest thing Whitney had heard in 2 years of recording studios in sold-out arenas. It was the sound of someone telling the absolute truth and not caring at all what that truth looked like on the way out. "Sing it with me," Clara May said. Whitney hesitated. She was supposed to be in vocal rest. She had a session at 9 in the morning that Clive Davis himself was attending. She sang anyway. They sang together for 2 hours. Clara May led and Whitney followed, which was not how anyone who might have been watching would have expected the evening to go. They moved through old gospel standards, songs Clara May had been singing since before Whitney was born, and Whitney listened the way she had listened as a child in this same church, before she knew her voice was exceptional. Between songs they talked. Clara May talked about the choir director who had told her, in 1952, that her voice was too raw for solo work. She talked about singing at her husband's funeral in 1971 and discovering in that moment that a voice carries something different when it's carrying real grief. More of what voices were originally built for. She talked about what happens to singers who spend their whole career trying to sound like what people expect. They get very good at the wrong thing, Clara May said. They become excellent at giving people what they already know. But the songs that stay with people, the ones you hear once and can't shake for the rest of your life, those come from the place that hurts. "I've been working on this song," Whitney said finally, "for a movie. I Will Always Love You. I know every note in it technically." She paused. "But I can't find the place it comes from. I keep singing the surface of it." Clara May was quiet. "Do you know what the song is about?" "Leaving someone," Whitney said. "Loving someone enough to let them go." "Have you ever had to do that?" The question landed somewhere very specific inside her. Whitney didn't answer out loud. She didn't have to. Clara May nodded slowly, as if the silence itself had told her everything. "Then you're already carrying the song," the old woman said. "You've had it inside you this whole time. The great ones always live in you before you sing them. You don't have to manufacture the feeling. You just have to stop protecting yourself from it long enough to let it come through." She played the opening notes. Not any particular arrangement. Not the produced version with the key change in the orchestra. Just the bare melody, slow and honest, and stripped of everything that wasn't the song itself. "Sing it like it costs you something," Clara May said. "Sing it like you're actually saying goodbye." Whitney closed her eyes. She found the first note not by locating it technically, but by letting it rise from somewhere behind the technique. And what came out of her in that fellowship hall was not the version she had rehearsed 43 times. It was something older, something that had been waiting underneath all the preparation, patient as a river under ice, waiting to be allowed to exist. Her voice didn't just carry the melody. It carried the weight of every real thing she had ever held and lost. And for the first time in months, she let that weight be audible. She didn't hide it behind the notes. She put it inside them. The church custodian mopping the hallway outside set down his mop and stood completely still. He would describe it later as the closest he had ever come, outside of actual prayer, to feeling like the ceiling of a room had opened. Clara May Washington died in 1998. She was 84 years old. Her obituary in the Newark Star-Ledger mentioned that she had been a longtime member of New Hope Baptist Church and a beloved figure in her community. It did not mention the Tuesday night she spent 2 hours in a fellowship hall teaching a young woman how to find the place a song actually comes from. Whitney Houston recorded "I Will Always Love You" in one take, one complete, uninterrupted take, which is not how recording sessions work for reasons that have everything to do with chasing perfection and very little to do with truth. David Foster and the engineers in the booth looked at each other through the glass when it was over, and nobody said anything for a long time. Because there was nothing to add. Because what they had just heard was already complete. Whitney never spoke publicly about that night in Newark. What happened in that fellowship hall between an old woman who had never been famous and a young woman who had never not been famous was complete in itself. It required no documentation, no public acknowledgement. It was the kind of conversation that music sometimes makes possible between people who would never have found each other any other way. The voice that stopped the world when it hit that final, sustained, impossible note. The one that made people set down whatever they were holding and stand very still and feel something they couldn't explain. That voice had learned its most important lesson on a folding chair in a cold fellowship hall from a woman who gave up on perfect in 1979 and found something true waiting on the other side of it. Some lessons don't come from the stage. Some of them come from the humblest room you know, from an old woman with two good fingers and 50 years of understanding what a song is really for. Have you ever had to let go of the need to prove something in your work, your relationships, your life, and found that the real gift was waiting on the other side of that? Tell us your story in the comments below.